not really the theme we're going with for this morning. But when I was preparing for this talk, I did the most obvious thing that one can do while preparing, which was to look up the definition of divergent and see if I had it right, if the concept that I had in my mind for divergent was the correct one. And I came up with two different, my slides are taking a while to go forward, two different very good definitions for divergent. So moving or extending in different directions from a common point. So moving in a different direction, which I like. And then differing from each other or from a standard. So I like this standard one. So being different from what's standard. And so this was very in line with the idea I had in my mind for what divergent is and what being divergent is. But I also wanted to gather my ideas and come to my own couple of definitions of what being divergent is. So my plan for today is to share with you a bit of my story and also the lessons that I hope will help you become a divergent protagonist of your own story. So for me, my definition of being divergent has to do with what I found previously in the actual definition from the dictionary, but also with thinking for yourself. So it's about thinking for yourself and not letting other people make decisions for you. So it's about doing something, not doing something just because everyone else is doing it, doing what you want to do. So about making your own decisions. Of course, you can be influenced by other people. Everyone is influenced by other people, but ultimately it's about making your own decisions. It's about asking questions and asking lots of questions and good questions. We'll talk a little bit about this later. It's also about critical thinking and digging deeper, not remaining on the surface of whatever subject it is that you're thinking about. It's about not remaining in a certain situation just because that's what you chose in the past. So you're always free to make new decisions, independent of what you've chosen in the past. So ultimately, it's about breaking away from the accepted or imposed narrative. Now, to start getting into a bit of my own story, my first, or what I consider to be my first divergent act or choice, was to decide that I wanted to write books. Now, why was this divergent at the time? Because it went against everything I believed about myself. That's why. So it took a lot of effort to do it because I didn't see myself as a writer. I didn't see myself as a creative person. Least of all, I thought I had zero creativity in me. While nowadays, I fully agree with the CreativeMornings manifesto. We are all creative, but I used to believe that I wasn't. And so this, for me, was going against a standard that I had set for myself and a narrative that I had imposed for myself. Because I was a very logical person. I always wanted to be a scientist. And so that was my accepted narrative. I was a scientist. I was good at science. I was good with numbers. I was not good with words. I was not good at being creative. And so this was my accepted narrative. And for me to decide that I wanted to be a writer, I had to change most of what I believed about myself. And so going against that narrative took some effort, but it paid off. So this was my first big divergent act. And then it became more significant because this passion for writing and this need to write books led me to as Rafaela said, change my entire life. So I decided to leave my job, my very good, stable job that I have at the time as a pharmaceutical development scientist, and start on my own with my own business. And in the beginning, I didn't even really know what business I was going to start. I knew I wanted to do something for myself, but my main objective was to have time to be the owner of my time and to have time to write whenever I wanted. So at the time, which business I was going to start was not even that important. What was important is that it would give me the freedom to do what I wanted with my time and to be able to spend a significant portion of my time writing. And so this passion that I discovered for writing led me to study and go very deeply into storytelling. And storytelling nowadays is ingrained in everything I do, not just writing, but my actual business. And in storytelling, so there are a few ingredients that are necessary in order to have a story. And those three ingredients mainly are characters. There's no story without characters. A conflict. So if nothing happens, if everything is just going according to plan, there's no story. There needs to be some conflict. And then it has to end with a resolution. And I think we can all agree that there are good stories and then stories that are not so good, not so interesting, not so captivating. And I think one of the things that makes a big difference to whether a story is interesting or not is how the character behaves throughout the story. So we know that there's going to be conflict in the story. We know that we have to end with a resolution, but what leads to the resolution? And for me, interesting characters are the ones who take active decisions. So, you know, those stories where things just happen to the character and they're like follow along and eventually the story ends, but it seems like they didn't do anything. Really, they just went with the flow. I don't think those are very interesting stories. I think when the characters are active, when they're actually doing things that matter to solve the conflict, whatever that is, that's what makes an interesting character and an interesting story. So when we talk about being the protagonist of your own story and being a divergent protagonist, we can look at stories and start to see what stories can teach us about this. And if you think about stories like the superhero type or action stories, they do tend to have very active protagonists. So the hero, for example, but those characters are not really very divergent because they pretty much just do what's expected of them. However, there is one type of story that tends to have very active and divergent protagonists. And this is the type of story that I'm passionate about. I love. I know not everyone loves them, but I'm in love with all different types of these types of stories, and those are dystopias. So basically, a dystopia is a utopia gone wrong. And what I want to do today is look at different stories of the dystopia kind and see what we can learn from them. And no, none of us are living in a full-on utopia, and thank God for that, because utopia will always turn into a dystopia, always. And it's easy to realize that because, well, a utopia is supposedly an idealized version of the world, but whose idealized version of the world, right? Because I'm sure that for you, an ideal world is very different than what an ideal world would be for me. And so every time someone tries to impose an idealized version of the world or a utopia, other people will not be happy about it because it's not their ideal. And so there will always be suffering, whether we're talking about someone's utopia or dystopia for other people. And so, yes, we're not living in a dystopia, we're not living in a utopia. However, a utopia is a theoretically perfect and at the same time an imposed narrative. And let me tell you something, we all live with those, okay? We all have some sort of imposed narrative that seems to be right and that seems to be perfect, but it's actually false, okay? So being a divergent protagonist means breaking away from those made up narratives in which we came to believe. So let's go, like I said, over some of the lessons that I've learned through my journey, particularly since I've decided to change my life, and also some lessons that we can take from these types of stories and see what we can learn from all of this and how to apply this into our own lives in order to be a divergent protagonist. And the first lesson was to not let yourself become numb, to wake up and to pay attention. Because most of the times, really, we're just following along. We're just going with the flow. We're not really thinking for ourselves. We're not really making active decisions. We're just doing what's expected from us. And that's what I realized I was doing when I came to the conclusion that I was not happy. I was not fully happy at my old job. I looked at my past and I realized I had never really made an active decision that went against what was expected. And so when I started to think about it, I started to pretty much make every decision from scratch again. So everything that I had chosen before, I decided to think about it again, like it was the first time, and come to sometimes a new conclusion. Sometimes it would be the same conclusion, actually. But the important things actually had different answers than I thought they would have. So questions like, what do I really want to do with my life, right? And while in the past, not having really thought about it, I thought, well, I want to be a scientist and have a stable job, and that's that for the rest of my life. I then came to the conclusion that no, actually, that's not what I want to do with my life. I want to write books and create impact and create my own business. And so that's what I'm going to do. And there were other questions that I asked myself, and I actually, like, for example, can I be creative? Well, I thought I was not, but now I'm dying to write books. Could I be creative? Could I develop a creativity skill within myself? And so I started working on that, and I came to the conclusion that, oh yes, I can be creative. After all, I had never thought about it, but I can, and we all can. And so for me, this represented waking up to the reality of who I was and the reality of who I wanted to be. And I really felt that for the 30 years before that, I was asleep. I was not paying attention. I was not paying attention to the world, and I was not paying attention to myself, to who I was really deeply in the core. And so when we try to make a parallel with the types of stories that I was talking about, so the dystopias, this becoming numb and being asleep pretty much is what happens throughout Brave New World from Aldous Huxley. And so actually in this story, there's this drug, this compound that everyone takes that makes them be asleep. That's not our reality, but it's like we have sometimes it's like we have some kind of drug in our minds that make us be asleep to certain information that is in the world. And so in the real life, this also happens, and we have proof from the real world, not just from stories, but from the real world, that we can't always see the full reality, the full scope of reality. Sometimes we are blind to some things that are happening right in front of us. So there's this very interesting experiment that some scientists have done with, it's called the invisible gorilla. I don't know if you've heard about it. So it's like a game where they have a group of 6 people. 3 of them are wearing white shirts, and then 3 of them are wearing black shirts. And you, as the test taker, are supposed to count the amount of time. So they're all passing a ball amongst each other, and you're supposed to count the amount of times the white team passes the ball. And so you watch a video, you watch the team, and you count the amount of times. And so people are super focused on that. And they don't, most of them don't even realize that in the middle of the video, there's this guy dressed in a gorilla suit that comes into the scenery, comes into the image, and they don't even see that because they are so focused on tracking the ball and counting the passes that a significant part of reality just passes them by. They're just blind to it, right? And this is the sort of thing that after you see it, you can't unsee it. So after you're told that the gorilla is going to show up in the video at some point, you cannot see it. But if you're not aware of it in the beginning, you'll be blind to that reality. So this shows that paying attention to the full scope of reality takes a conscious effort, because if we just go with the flow, some things are going to pass us by without us even noticing. And that's really dangerous when we're trying to live an intentional life. So this was my first lesson. I need to wake up. I need to wake up to reality and start making my own decisions. Then there was another thing that I needed to learn that was very important for me, because I had this tendency from my past of being very obedient, doing everything that was expected of me and never going against what I was told. And when I decided to quit my job, that was pretty much, I was breaking a rule, right? You're not supposed to quit your job just because you decided. So it felt like being disobedient. It felt like breaking a rule. And since then, I've done many things that have felt like breaking a rule, but they're just made up rules. And so I realized that we grow up being taught mostly how to be obedient. We are compensated for being obedient, for behaving well, for not going against the grain, right? However, when we become adults and we tend to do the same, we tend to just follow authority, whatever is asked of us, whatever we're told to do, we just do it. That makes us pretty much not divergent. That makes us the same as everyone else and just shows that we're not thinking for ourselves. And again, we see this in stories all the time. And one example from Dystopia world is The Handmaid's Tale, where everyone has to be very obedient and everyone is pretty much just looking down all the time. They don't even look up because they're not allowed to. And so we also see this in the real world in very, very scary ways. There was also this experiment conducted where they had, so it was supposed to be a learning experiment. There was a student and a teacher, and the student was in on the experiment. The person playing the teacher was the one being studied pretty much. And so the student would have to answer questions, and the teacher, so the subject of the study, right, the person who didn't really know what was going on, was supposed to, every time they gave a wrong answer, they were supposed to give them a shock, an electrical shock that would start at 15 volts and then would increase every time they gave a wrong answer, up to 450 volts, I think. And you can actually, if you look up online, you can hear some recordings from this experiment, and people actually feel terrible doing this. like giving an electrical shock to someone else just because they gave a wrong answer. And some of them try to stop. They try to talk with the experimenter and say, do we really have to do this? And the experimenter keeps insisting with the person and telling them, you have to continue. You have to do this. The experiment requires for you to continue giving shocks to this person. And you can actually hear in the recordings, people actually keep doing it. Everyone kept doing it until at least 300 volts, I believe. And in some of the recordings, you can actually hear the people asking the experiment, well, do you take responsibility for what happens? If you take responsibility, I'll keep doing it, right? So it's like we free ourselves from the responsibility of making our own decisions. It's like, as long as the experiment is taking responsibility for this, I'm just doing what I am told to do. So it's not my fault, but I'm still the one inflicting the electrical shocks on someone else, right? So how would you feel if you were the one in this experiment giving electrical shocks to someone else and not thinking for yourself and not making your own decisions and just doing what you're told? It's not very nice. And sometimes this happens like explicitly. In this case, they were explicitly told what they had to do, but other times it's very implicit, right? So people don't always tell you explicitly, you have to do this or you should do this, but it's implied in the way things work, in society, in everything that's around us. And so another example of an experiment is in a waiting room, like a doctor's waiting room, where lots of people are waiting and everyone is in on the experiment except for one person. And then at a certain point, a bell goes off. And when the bell goes off, everyone but the person who's being analyzed stands up, right? So imagine yourself, you're at a doctor's waiting room and suddenly there's a bell going off and everyone around you stands up. What do you do, right? Do you stand up as well? Or do you keep sitting down because you don't really know what's going on? So in this experiment, most people end up standing up as well, together with everyone else. They don't really know why they're doing it, but they just do it just because everyone else is doing it. So again, they're not making their own decisions. They're not thinking for themselves. They're just going with what everyone else is doing. So we know that this is, again, our natural tendency most of the times. So we have to make a conscious effort to be divergent and think for ourselves. All of what I'm talking about today has to be very conscious and implies a lot of awareness from our part. So another thing that I had to learn when I decided to change my path was that there is no separation between humans. We are all the same. And I believe some people try to convince us that we are separate, that some people are better than others. And maybe most dangerous of all is that we convince ourselves of this. So sometimes it comes from others, but sometimes it comes from ourselves. And I felt this in the beginning when I was trying to change my career. And I also see this with people that I've worked with since then, people who are also starting their own businesses and their own projects. And what happens here is that because we feel like we are different from other people, many times we feel like we are less than other people. We don't think we are capable of reaching the same results that we see other people reaching. So sometimes we look around and we see someone was successful with their business, someone was able to achieve this or that. And then we think, but they're special. I'm not that special. I'm not that good. That's never going to work for me. I'm different. I'm not that good. And so when we realize that we are all the same and we are all capable of the same, then we start looking around and we start looking at these examples of people who have succeeded, who have reached some place that we also would like to reach. And we start seeing that, well, this is also possible for us. Okay. And so for me, it was a very big struggle in the beginning, because I always saw myself as working for someone else, just keeping my regular job. And in the beginning, I didn't think I would be capable of starting a business. And that's what I see most of the people I work with believing in as well. And this comes from separation, right? From this idea that we are separate from each other. We are different. Someone's better than us, or we are better than some people, also happens. And in the world of dystopia, this is at the basis of the Hunger Games. And yes, we are getting into some young adult here. Bear with me. I love young adult, and I'm still going to love it by the time I'm 80. So there's that. But yeah, so in this story, society is divided into districts, right? And they are all separate from each other. And particularly the elite district, who lives in the capital and who makes all the decisions, they think they're better than anyone else, right? And they actually gather people from all of the different districts to kill each other, which generates more separation. So you go there with the feeling that I represent my district and everyone else is different than me. And so this is at the basis of wars. This is what generates a lot of evil in the world. And actually, for this one, I don't have like a scientific study or some fact for some example from science to share with you, but I'm just gonna put this image in here and move on. So I think we all know what happens when there's this sense of separation and of I'm better than a certain group of people, right? So just realizing that we're all the same, we're all capable of the same, and we can reach whatever result someone else has already been able to reach. And then this fourth one also comes closely related with the previous one, right? And with the two previous one, actually, from following authority, which is this tendency that we have, again, to believe everything we hear or read, especially when it comes from an authoritative figure, or when it comes from someone more experienced than us, right? And so I would like to invite you to question all of the information that you come across with. And for me, in the beginning of my business, this was, I used to be bombarded with a lot of information being shared that would work on convincing me that in order to have a successful business, you had to work a lot. Like you had to work 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, give up on weekends, give up on taking vacations, just work all the time, give up on having a life, and sacrifice a lot and be very dedicated. And actually, this belief in the first year of my business, of running my business, it really impacted my life. So it nearly destroyed my health, my mental health. It nearly destroyed some of my relationships, particularly the most important relationship in my life with my husband. That almost went down the drain because I believed that I had to be working all the time. So I had no hobbies. I had no time to take care of myself. I had no time to exercise. And why? Just because I convinced myself that that's what I was needed. I absorbed information around me that passed on this information, and I still see a lot of this today. A lot of people who talk about entrepreneurship, about running a business, they still try to pass on this message that it takes a lot of effort. It's very difficult. You're going to have to sacrifice a lot in order to have a successful business. And nowadays, I just don't believe that that is true. I believe in balance. I believe that you can have time for everything you decide that you want to have time for. Right now, I'm working in my business 4 hours a day, And I realize now that even though I worked so hard in the first year, I achieved almost nothing because I wasn't working on the right things. And so I honestly believe that I could have been working 4 hours a day since the very beginning if I knew what the right activities and tasks were. So this happens in lots of other situations. A lot of people also pass on the information that it's very hard to manage your finances when you work for yourself because it's very irregular and very unpredictable. And plus, when you work for yourself, you have to pay a huge amount of taxes. And so it's very different to manage everything. Well, is it that difficult? Maybe it's not. Maybe there are ways to get around it. And so what I learned to do was to not believe all of the information that I come across with, and to investigate things for myself, and to try to look for different types of information. And when I hear the information, well, you have to work a lot, try to look for people that defend the opposite and make it work without having to work all those hours. When I hear the information that it's very difficult to manage your finances when you work for yourself, I look for people who defend the opposite, people who teach me how to manage my finances while working for myself. And so this is about digging deeper and investigating for yourself, and not just believing the information that you're fed all of the time. And when we go into the story world, we have, of course, 1984, which has the Ministry of Truth, which all it does is lies and propaganda, but they call themselves the Ministry of Truth. And so that's supposedly the truth, right? So question the information you come across with in all areas. Sometimes you question it and you investigate, and you can come to the conclusion that, well, yeah, it was true. But other times you can discover a whole different reality when you start investigating for yourself. And that makes life much more interesting. Now, in real life, there's this website that a guy created just with random correlations, right? So how interesting is this? The number of people who drown by falling into a pool correlates really well with the number of films Nicolas Cage appear in that year. So there's correlation, right? And we all know correlation does not mean causation. And so we look at this and we think, okay, someone could try to convince me that the more films Nicolas Cage appears in, then the more people will drown by falling into a pool. You could be fed that information, or someone could try to feed you that. Now, this example is very funny because it's very obvious that there's no real causation here, right? It's just a coincidence. So yeah, we can all look at this and see, no, that's not true. But what if the two situations being analyzed were actually similar, or were actually related to each other? Meaning, if it was not that obvious that they're not caused by each other, would I immediately believe it just by looking at a graph, or would I be able to question it and go dig deeper? So even when it seems to be true, when it seems to be plausible that there is correlation and causation, still question it, still go investigate for yourself and see if it really is true. And then for my last one, and this is a very important one, and maybe the most important one, which is about not over-identifying with a certain label, with something, right? So it's about not believing you have to be just one thing. And I think a lot of people who change careers at a certain point in time, they learn to let go of a previous identity. Like, I used to be a scientist and then I stopped being a scientist. But then what ends up happening a lot of the times is they end up over-identifying with their new title, with their new career, and then they get stuck again. They don't even realize it, right? And so this is about ripping off all of the labels that you've attached to yourself and just being whoever you decide to be. And I see this a lot also with people who I work with, who are like, so I used to be an accountant and now I'm a designer, for example. So I've dropped the accountant identity. Well, but now I'm a designer, and so I have to do what designers do. Or in my world, I used to be a scientist, but now I'm a coach. And so coaches are supposed to do something in a certain way, and so I'm supposed to do that. Well, no, because I can be whatever I want to be. And it's not because just because I made one change in my life that I have to stick with it forever and ever, right? And so we come to my final story, my final dystopia for you today, which is, of course, Divergent, which is a story where there are 4 factions and you have to choose one faction and be that for the rest of your life. And the divergent people are the people who don't accept that, who want to be more than one faction. And there's also a study that shows that we tend to feel stuck to the identity that we hold today. So a group of psychologists asked people how much they had changed in terms of personality preferences in the last 10 years. And people recognized that they had changed a lot. And then they asked them to predict, well, how much do you think you're going to change in the next 10 years? And the prediction was like, no, I don't think I'm going to change that much in the next 10 years. And this is called the end of history illusion, which shows that we believe that who we are today is who we'll be 10 years from now, or maybe for the rest of our lives. This makes no sense, because if we've changed before, then we are capable of doing it again. So our identity can change, our personality can change, our preferences, likes and dislikes can change. And so my last invitation for you is to drop all of the labels that you've decided to put on yourself and maybe choose new ones or no labels at all and just be whatever you want to be. So as a summary, right, this is all about asking questions and asking good questions. So pay attention, don't live in a numbed down state. Question the way things are. Don't be blindly obedient, think for yourself. Question the orders you're given. And don't believe you are separate from others. We are all one. Question those who try to convince you otherwise. Don't believe everything you're told. Investigate for yourself. Question the information you come across. And don't accept labels. Be everything you want to be. Question yourself, your own choices and decisions. Be divergent. So I hope you choose to break away from your false narrative from now on, whatever that may be. It will make for a more interesting life, I'm sure. Thank you. And now I think we have some time for questions.
We do. Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. So exciting. Thank you so much for preparing this lovely presentation for us and for being so thorough. This actually speaks volumes about the way you approach communication and approach, whatever you do. Yeah, it's true. I've known you professionally and personally for quite a long time now. And, this was amazing. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We have maybe 5 minutes for questions, okay? Because I know that you guys and me, we have to work. So bring it on. I'm thankful for this presentation. Joey's saying, Molly, she's saying really excellent talk. Thank you, Filipa. People are talking in the chat. Filipa, you can also check it out.
Yeah,
whoever has a question, please raise your hand or unmute yourself and go for it. Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you so much for coming. And great advice. I think people enjoy it. Tchau, Beatriz, canas, mendes, beijinhos. So, don't we have questions for Filipa? Really?
I have one.
Okay. Souza, okay. Ana Souza, go.
Yeah, I'm just curious about what do you think you still have from your scientific life in your current life? Because I'm a scientist too, and
Cool.
I know what you struggled because I feel it. So I really connected with what you shared, and I want to know, what do you think you still have from your scientific life?
Tons, creativity. So I used to think that because I was a scientist, I wasn't creative. Well, as a scientist, you have to be creative. To be innovative, you have to be creative. Structure, just being able to be structured when doing things, right? So seeing a structure in everything, and sometimes not just in numbers or scientific facts, but in tendencies, in everything, in people, in everything else. Planning is very important. As a scientist, you have to plan, and so I think I brought that from my previous experience. And just I think the ability of looking at things from different angles, right? Because when you're a scientist, you're presented with data, and you have to look at it from different points of view, different angles, to try to make sense of it. And so when you bring that to other areas of your life, you become much more innovative, creative, an excellent problem solver, right? Scientists are problem solvers. So yeah, tons. I brought tons of it from my science background.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Filipa. Elizabeth Oliveira, I think she's currently in the moon right now, and she wants to ask a question.
I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed the talk, so thank you so much. I've been following you for quite a while, and I'm actually curious because I never asked this. Have you started writing your books?
Oh, I've written 3 books already.
Oh, that's good.
But none of them are published yet. So I'm in the process of getting my first one published. Yeah, but the first one I wrote while in my previous job. So it's very old by now, and it needs a lots of revision, but it's the first draft is finished. And then I wrote a second one around my first year after quitting my job. And in 2020, during lockdown, I wrote my third book, and that's the one I'm hoping that will be published this year. So let's see if I have some news later this year.
That's very good. Congratulations.
Thank you. There's also a question in the chat about which of these lessons has been most challenging for you to implement. The last one, because identity is very, very big. Okay. It's one of the most difficult things for human beings to change. And we hear this a lot when we hear people talking about changing habits, right? We talk about people in the health industry saying, well, if you want to implement healthy habits, then first you have to see yourself as a healthy person, right? That's a change in identity, right? I see myself as unhealthy. I want to become healthy, so I need to start seeing myself as healthy. And sometimes that's the most difficult thing to do. So we try to implement the habits, the good habits, the healthy habits. But if we don't change the identity, the habits won't stuck, because we will always revert back to our identity. So that's what I think is the most challenging one.
This is great. Thank you so much, Filipa. I don't know if we have any other questions or curious people wanting to chip in. Okay, we have another question, Filipa Madaleno. Do you have any advice for instilling these lessons in the younger people?
Yes. First of all, stories, right? We learn from stories. So it's not by accident that I used stories in this talk. So yes, stories can help change our worldview, change our beliefs about the world. That, and I would say, so I'm not a parent yet, so I cannot speak from experience, but I think self-awareness. I think if you work on these lessons for yourself, your kids will follow. They will watch you, and they will see you as an example, and they will follow you.
Okay, we have maybe time for one last question. Joe, hi, you raise your hand.
Sim, bom dia. Hi. Maybe this feels a bit different from the presentation, but how do you feel about moving to another country?
I feel great. Well, I'm very happy to be here. This was a long journey. We've been wanting to move here for a very long time. It didn't happen the moment we wanted it to, the moment we made the decision, or the moment we wanted it to happen. And again, we had to go against a lot of the things that we thought were true and we were told were true. For example, the first company that we tried to reach to in order to move here, they told us there's no way you're not going to be able to do it, because right now it's impossible to get a visa to the United States. And so if we had believed that, if we had just been fed that information and stuck with it, we would have been stuck in Portugal. And we were like, no, we don't believe that. We believe we can actually do it. And so it feels great. We feel at home here. People have been asking us, because we've been here for 6 weeks now, people have been asking us, so how are you adapting to your new place? And I'm like, I'm not adapting. I got home. I'm home. So there's no adaptation. It just is. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Filipa. I hope you feel at home forever and ever, wherever you go. Right now is Oregon, US, but
Yeah.
I know that you lived in Porto, in Lisbon, and so you have this ability to make home wherever you are, and I believe that's a big skill in our world. And guys, thank you so much. Filipa, thank you for taking the time. And it's 2 a.m. over there. I hope you go to sleep, and I hope you go to sleep happy with what happened today. So Green Elbows.
Happy. Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here. Even if it's 1 a.m, 2 a.m, I'm so happy to
Thank you
had
so
this
much.
opportunity.
Thank you so much, Filipa. Oh, I'm just so happy. I think that we're all going to keep following you, and so keep us up to date on your challenges and adventures. And I know that you'll have a lot to say, and we're waiting for your books. And we also have Becky. She's actually one of our team members. Green Elbows is her username, and she's from the US. She's from near Salt Lake City, and she moved to Portugal 2 years ago. And I'm lucky to be her friend. And she said that she feels the same way you feel about US. She feels the same way about Portugal. Like, she got home.
Awesome.
I think that this talk spoke to her personally a lot. Lenia, thank you so much for coming. This was a major boost, she says. Tanya Teixeira, thank you for being here every single month. And guys, so I hope you have an amazing day. Filipa, keep rocking and keep that boat. And guys, have a great day. Let's go to work and have an amazing weekend. Beijinhos.
Bye. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much. It was amazing.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Beijinhos.